launch of my new novel, Mental Damnation Reality. It actually isn't the first iteration of this book. It is the second edition. And some of you actually in the audience, you can point them, make them feel uncomfortable, have seen this row from the original novel from 2012, which was this version. And I did the launch here too, at Happy Harbor, and it was a lot of fun. But the concept of mental damnation dates even further back than in 2012. The concept came to me in high school, so that would have been 10 years ago now. So it's been a long process trying to get this story to where I want it to be. And the idea had initially came to me in math class, because back then I played a lot of Neverwinter Nights, Icewind Dale, World of Warcraft. I was like really big into RPG video games, and I didn't like math. So it was a work period, and I was like, I don't want to solve for X, don't like that. So I was drawing instead. And when I was drawing, it was of a reptilian character clutching her head, and she was kind of between two worlds. One side of the illustration was a forest, and then the other was like this demented hell with like stitched zombies and demons, and she had her head clutched, and there's this lightning bolt in the middle, and I was like, oh, that's cool. What if she's like, thinks she's in hell, but she doesn't know if she's in hell? And I thought about that for a bit, and toyed with different concepts for the name of it, like mental hell, mind inferno, and eventually came together with mental damnation. And I wanted to take it a step further because I also enjoyed writing and had done a couple of manuscripts prior, back in junior high. So I wanted to see if I could make a novel out of this. Very much inspired from Diablo and that kind of heaven and hell concept, but throwing in a psychology twist to it. So I decided to take a new process that I hadn't done with writing and do story outlines and chapter outlines. And that actually ended up being this binder here that I finished in 2007. And I did a bunch of illustrations and all the different chapter outlines for it. So it's a very linear kind of point form of how the story goes in a chronological sense. So it helps me reach different like milestones as I'm writing the actual manuscript. So once I finished that, I hammered out the first manuscript in 8 months, worked really hard, 4 hours to 6 hours a day instead of homework. So I did that, flushed it out, and didn't know what to do with this manuscript. And back in 2007, Kindles were just starting to rise up, and there weren't a lot of readers, especially locally, that were using it, so I thought I'd go the traditional route. And I looked into the different options to contact publishers. A lot of them won't talk to you unless you have an agent, like Penguin or some of those other really big names. So I found a few other ones locally in Alberta and BC, and that take fiction and fantasy. So I contacted them, saw what they wanted. They wanted book proposals, so I had to learn about book proposals now. So after that, I found out what you had to put in them, like your marketing plan, what the book was about, the demographic and age range and competition. Put that all together in a nice envelope with the manuscript, mailed it off to them, and waited and waited. And eventually I heard back from them, and it ended up being a rejection letter, which was a big bummer. It was very disappointing at the time, and I was graduating high school, because that would have been 2008 now. And I was also being like heckled by all my teachers, like, what are you doing with your life? Where are you going to college? What are you going to do? And it was, I was like, I don't know, I want to write. They're like, you can't do that. And like, yeah, and I actually did give it some actual thought and realized it's a big step and a big risk. So I decided to get into graphics, which was something I was doing on the side. So I went to a college called Guru Digital Arts College and graduated their digital media production program. Ended up teaching at the school for a couple of years, which was a lot of fun. And during that time, I was talking to the secretary. Her and I were chatting during a coffee break, and she asked if I had any hobbies. And I said, yeah, I actually really enjoy writing. She's like, yeah, have you written anything? I said, yeah, I've got finished manuscript. It's ready to go. She's like, you wrote a book? I was like, well, it's a manuscript. It hasn't been edited. She's like, yeah, but you wrote a book. And I said, yeah, you could call it that. She said she wanted to read it. So I emailed it to her. And then the next day, when I came into the school, she looked at me with like really wide eyes. And she said, your book is fucking scary. And I was like, oh, awesome. Oh, that's great. Glad it scared you. She said, she actually is also Wiccan, and she said she wanted to put it in the freezer. Because I studied a lot of like Christian mythology and just Wiccan and Druidic backgrounds to come up with a lot of the symbols and stuff. So she said she wanted to put it in the freezer, but she didn't put her laptop in the freezer. So that was good. But it was eye-opening because she was the first person that wasn't family that read the book. And it was eye-opening to hear someone enjoy the reading or the actual writing. And she knew it wasn't edited and it needed some work, but she told me that I should pursue it professionally. Took her advice seriously and decided to look into my options, because I could either A, go traditional publishing, or go B, self-publishing. And I looked into some of the self-publishing options again. This would have been in 2011 now, so we jumped up a few years. Self-publishing has flourished a little bit more. Kindle's a little more popular. You had Kobo, and being in the graphic design industry now, I understood print shops and how to prepare print files. So I can actually talk to a print shop and say, here's my print file, can you print this for me? So now I've got the skill base and I understand the graphics and how to do the self-publishing, and I thought I'd give it a go. But that wasn't the final step, is getting the book printed. I knew I needed an editor because English wasn't actually my specialty while growing up. It took a long time to get to know English, and I talked to some friends and colleagues to find an editor. Interviewed maybe about 4, and some of them didn't work, some of them their prices were too high, and I actually met one through a friend of a friend, and we hit it off really well. She was a fantasy nerd and also wanted to work on the book. She found it a cool concept, so yeah, we started editing away. And I was also grateful for her because she was kind enough to tutor me on English. So not only was she editing, but she was teaching me how to, syntax, grammar, and all that fun stuff, punctuation. And we spent all of 2011 going through and finishing to get this first edition out, which came out in 2012. Now, to jump ahead a little further, after that one came out, 2 more editions came out, Dream and Fusion. And once I finished those 3 books, I realized I needed a break from the series because I was just going really aggressive in all this writing. And I came out with another book called Seed Me in 2016, so last year. And that book was a lot of fun because I took a step back with writing. And instead of doing what I did in the previous books, I wanted to try a whole new writing style, do something different, and take an opportunity to really expand my writing skills. And that book is written in first-person past tense, where Mental Damnation is third-person present tense. So the writing format is very different than in Mental Damnation. So once I finished Seed Me, I decided I would go back and finish Mental Damnation, and I wanted to write the 4th book. But it had been a couple of years since I had actually visited that story, so I needed to brush up on the lore. And to do that, I had to read the first one. Went through it, was going through the first couple of chapters, and realized it fell under a lot of cliches that books start with. One of the big problems is the concept of telling and not showing. And a lot of books tend to fall under that. And my editor always tried to explain it to me while we were working on the first one. She was like, you gotta show the events, you can't just tell what happened. And I didn't really get what that meant. And it took me a number of years until I started working on Seed Me to really understand what that concept meant. And the concept of showing and telling would be, for example, for this event itself, I could say, Con Lavery is having a book launch at Happy Harbor. It starts at 5 and the reading's at 6, and people went to it. That would be telling. Showing would be, so you're kind of immersed going through the character's experience, but you're still getting the facts. And that's the difference between showing and telling. And when I was reading through to follow up on the lore to write the fourth book, I realized I could really come back and improve on the original book. And this would be the best opportunity to go through and do that before even working on the fourth one. I could take a step back, clean up the first book, and really show the story rather than telling it. And that kind of takes us where we're at today with this book. A lot of the new chapters, especially the first one that I'll read, has the same lore, same concepts, but it's told in a completely different narrative format, so it's more enjoyable and immersive. And yeah, I'll read to you the first chapter here. All right. So, chapter 1, Soft Skins. Thick red liquid oozed down the gray, mangy fur of a wolf. The animal lay on its side against a moss-covered tree, eyes glazed over and ears lowered. Flies began to swarm around its body. Each irregular breath it took was followed by a wheezing noise as blood pumped from the torn flesh around its neck. There were bite marks around the animal's throat, clear indicators of an attack by another beast. Whether the animal had been engaged in combat with another wolf, or possibly a larger predator, was not important to the father and daughter who had discovered the dying creature and now stood mere meters from it. No. Unfortunately, the fate of the wolf had been sealed, and now the question remained, what does one do with a dying animal? Killing and death are common things, my Krista, the father said, looking down at his daughter through the slim pupils of his yellow eyes. He got down on one knee, extending his brown, scaly claw to stroke the top of her head, which was covered densely in long, thin black and navy feathers, both in the animal kingdom and in ours. But you always said killing is a wicked deed, father. So are all animals wicked? The little girl blinked a couple of times, staring at her father's large, crested head. Yes, I did say that. The animal world is different than ours, their intentions less sinister. Killing is a regular part of our lives for the wrong reasons. Because of the humans? The father nodded, his small nostrils flaring. Yes, because of the humans. He got up to his feet and pulled out a dagger that was sheathed in his belt. Animals understand the natural balance of our world, unlike those who are deemed civilized. Come now, we must offer this animal mercy. How? The girl asked, following her father as he approached the whimpering wolf. You're not going to kill the poor thing, are you? She stopped in her tracks, grabbing hold of the tip of her thin brown tail. I must, Krista. There are only a few scenarios where you will find yourself in need of killing. The wolf's eyes looked over towards the approaching reptilian and snarled weakly, exposing its teeth. It didn't even have the strength to lift its head. The wolf's breathing rapidly increased, and it coughed with the effort. Either as a favor for ending one's suffering, the father moved swiftly, dashing on all fours, dagger in hand. His long tail swayed side to side, aiding in his movement. He skidded on his knees before coming to a stop and plunging his dagger up into the animal's skull from the lower jaw. The wolf gurgled a couple of times and twitched, and the body relaxed, and all movements stopped. Blood seeped down the dagger onto the reptilian's hand. Or, in self-defense. He looked over at his daughter. Some of his scalp feathers had been displaced by his quick movements, and he brushed them back with his free hand. Remember that. Krista nodded and stared at the wolf's corpse, while her father pulled the knife from the skull. She felt her heart sink, knowing that the animal was now gone, forever. Her father was right, but she had a hard time grasping the concept of taking another's life. Removing a living being from the world seemed like too much power, a horrific act. Yes, father, she replied. He stood and wiped the blade of blood against his knee-length green trousers. Ideally, save your claws for self-defense. Use a weapon for more accurate execution when ending one's suffering. Pointing at the ground beside Krista, he added, Pick up the berries. Your mother will need them for dinner. The little girl's eyes widened. She had completely forgotten about the woven basket filled with berries that she had harvested. She snatched up the basket by its arched handle. The fruits were native to the pine forest, sweet, purple, and covered in lumps. Come now. Krista's father extended his hand, and Krista grabbed it. The two walked slowly past the corpse of the wolf and back onto the rough dirt path. "Father, what if I don't want to kill?" Her father let out a hearty chuckle. "There will come a point in time where you will have to." "What if I don't kill in self-defense or help anyone suffering?" "I pray to the spirits that you do not have to. However, I will never lie to you." He looked down at her with a smile, tight-lipped. Do you think I'll have to kill the humans?" "Humans are a much younger race than us Vaisleads, aging quickly and processing the world at a rapid rate. It causes them to think drastically, jumping to conclusions. Thinking at this speed worked as an advantage to defeat the Draconim." "I don't understand why they hate us so much." "The humans? I don't think it is hate as it is fear. Their paranoia turned them into the very thing they opposed after the end of the Drac Age." "What's that?" "Racial oppressors." Krista frowned. She found it baffling that there were such terrible things in the world. She only wanted everyone to get along. As she was concerned, the world had plenty of space for everyone. "I wish we could all live together." "The humans see us as a threat. They think we are allied with the Draconim, hence their paranoia." "But we're not, are we?" "No, Krista, not our village. The other villages overseas in Europe? I cannot speak for them. Harmony with the humans is just not an option. We live in a time of bigotry, and you need to prepare to defend yourself." "I don't want to kill, Dad. I want to have peace." "As do we all. Killing sounds like the opposite of peace. I won't be part of it." "Your passion is warming to hear, my dear daughter. There are things at work that are much larger than you or I. Some of the Drac Lords survived at the end of the Drac Age, and the humans are continually looking to hunt them down. Our kind were not meant to be dragged into this dispute between the Draconim and the humans. We are simply suffering the consequences for a minor physical resemblance. I can only hope that the spirits will guide us through this." "We're not a threat to them. I wish they could just see that." "It's not so simple, my daughter. Unless you can peel off your scales and pigment your skin to look like theirs, they will remain suspicious of us. They will never accept us as Vaisleads." Krista and her father continued down the path, leading out of the thick wilderness. It was a good hike from their home, and well worth the journey to gather the berries. The fruit served as a delicious dessert after their dinner. Plus, Krista enjoyed having the one time with her father without her pesky little brother getting in the way. It was a special father-daughter time. Lately, she could tell her father was ill at ease. She couldn't fully grasp all of the events going on between the humans and her people, or throughout the kingdom of Zingal. But she knew her dad. It took a lot to throw him off his normally calm state. Plus, this wasn't the first time he had discussed killing with her. There was a reason he was lecturing her. As they passed the last couple of pine trees and moved through the shrubbery, the two stood at the top of the grassy hill, looking down at their village, which was about 400 paces away. The small, round wooden huts were aligned in rows all around the town, complete with backyard gardens. Just beyond the town was a river with a footbridge. Stretching from the riverbank were a couple of docks where the townfolk would catch fish. "We truly live in a paradise," the father smiled. "I never tire of exiting Kazuchi Forest to see our town. Zingalg is very pretty." Truthfully, she had not explored the continent very much. She was way too young, only about 90 years old. She had a lot of growing up to do before she could venture out on her own. Krista was much better off learning from her elders, as her mother would say. "Oh no," Krista thought. "Mom!" She swallowed heavily. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Before we left, I completely forgot to grab the clothes off the drying racks. Please don't be mad." The father shook his head. "Nonsense. It's not a big deal." "It is to Mom." Nitpicky details. He winked at her. "I'll have a word with her." "Thank you." She smiled. The two finished hiking down the slope, leaving behind the massive wild forest at the base of the large mountain. Looking back to the trees, Krista could see the steep, dark gray rock face behind them, Mount Kazuchi. Krista had never been beyond Kazuchi Forest to see what was up the mountain. It remained as mysterious as the low clouds that shrouded its true height. In no time, the two of them reached the bottom of the grassy hill. The footpath they walked on was now much wider and covered by gravel. Villagers busily walked up and down and across the road, completing their daily tasks while the sun was still shining. Some carried tools like axes or hammers. while others hauled barrels filled with lumber or grain. A number of villagers were making exchanges with bakers or cooks so they could return to their home and prepare for dinner. "I miss days like this," Krista's father commented. This was the normal, a self-sustaining community of tradesmen and farmers. "Yeah," Krista nodded. She knew her father was referring to the increased trading with the blacksmiths of the town for swords and shields, thanks to the hushed rumors about the humans. Nowadays, their people spent their days practicing with their new weapons instead of enjoying time with each other. The blacksmiths used to only make basic tools for their village. Now, with the new weaponry, high tension was radiating throughout the town. No one was sure what, if anything, the humans were planning to do with their people, where they were, or when. The one thing was certain was the fear of the unknown that they created, and back to their home hut. The round dwelling was made of logs and animal hides, forming two circular rooms. One was a living quarter and the other was a kitchen and work area. "Just follow my lead, and don't worry about your mother." Krista's father squeezed her hand once more before letting it go, and he stepped into their hut, pushing aside the red linen curtain that draped over the entrance. "My love, we've returned from the harvest," he announced. Krista followed close behind him, nervously fidgeting with her handle of the basket. She never liked upsetting her parents. Her mother got exceptionally displeased when things she asked were not done. Krista picked up on the scent of cooking lentils in the room, and she eyed the entryway where her father had a table with his gardening tools, along with unset plates. Next to them was a set of painted wooden blocks that belonged to her brother. The table was multi-purpose, or as her mother would say, a mess. The dirt floor was several thick black rugs over to help soften the space. Wooden shelves were carved against the curved walls. Beads hung from the ceiling just by the kitchen counter, helping to divide the entrance from the cooking area. My love stood on the other side of the counter, hands on her hips, a wooden cooking spoon in hand. Her face was the hue of sandstone, was etched in a scowl. Her blue scalp feathers were messy, and some draped over her green eyes as she stared at her husband and daughter. "Crystalantis Scalebane," my love spoke in a stern voice. "Where have you been?" Krista swallowed. Her mom only ever used her full name when she was mad at her. This isn't good. "She's been harvesting berries and learning about the challenges of life," Krista's father said with a smile, leaning down and grabbing the basket from Krista. "Yes, I know, Scalius. She was not supposed to leave until all her chores were done." She looked down at Krista, and she knew that. Krista looked away while putting her hands behind her back. "Sorry." "She can take care of them now while dinner is cooking." Scalius stepped over to his wife, placing the basket on the counter. He gave her a quick lick across the cheek with his thin black tongue before stepping towards the doorway leading into the next room. "I'll be reading while she does." "Wait." My love gently grabbed her husband's arm, and he paused in his steps. "We need to talk." She looked over to Krista. "Dear, can you wash the lentils for me?" "Why can't Salanth do it?" "Your brother is out back taking care of the chores that you left behind." Krista frowned. "I swear that little brat is the favorite." "Yes, Mum." My love left the wooden spoon on the counter and followed Scalius into the extended room through the doorway, divided by another red linen curtain. Their lowered, muffled voices could just barely be heard from the kitchen. Krista moved past the counter, grabbing the spoon as she went. She stepped closer to where she could see the stone stovetop with the pot of lentils boiling over the small fire. The doorway beside it was curtainless and opened into the backyard, where her brother presumed to be. She caught notice of a wooden footstool beside the counter. She had to use it any time her mother needed her to help her in the kitchen. Krista hated having to rely on it. If she were taller, like her father, then she wouldn't have to carry the footstool like a crutch. "When I'm older, things will change," she thought while dragging the footstool beside the stovetop. "Then I can do what I want and reach what I want without help." Krista got onto the stool and began stirring the pot of lentils, moving the spoon clockwise. Some of the bubbles in the pot dissipated, and she was careful to avoid the steam. Learn one task at a time. She was decent at cooking thanks to her mom, but she could always learn more. Krista's eyes widened as she heard her mother exclaim the word, "What?" Scalius hushed her and spoke in a sentence too low for Krista to pick up. What's so important that they are whispering? Krista thought. Curiosity got the best of her, and she got off her footstool. When I'm older, there also won't be all these secrets. Krista carefully crept closer to the doorway, leading into the living room quarters, and leaned her ear hole as close as she could into the red linen fabric without brushing up against it. A small sliver between the wooden doorway and the cloth allowed her to see her parents on the other end of the room. My love had her arms folded, one hand stroking her neck. Scalius held her arms with both hands. It was difficult to hear over the fire and boiling water, but Krista focused intently as her father spoke. Like I said, the Council of Just have sent the Paladins of Zeal and the Knights Union to round up the other villages. That is why our people are making weapons? Yes, a few of the people know, and the rest are following out of fear. What are the humans doing with the other villages? I do not know, he mumbled. We need to get out of here then. Why are we still here? Not so quickly, my love. It would be foolish to get up and run. We are safe as possible here at the base of Mount Kazuchi. No one comes up here. My love exhaled through her nostrils, her tail coiling around her ankle. I don't like sitting here. Packing and running makes no benefit to us either. The Council of Just brought the world out of the Drak Cage, and the kingdom of Zingalg will listen to them without question. This whole land is a human dictatorship. What if we set sail, leave Zingalg and head for Europe, or overseas in the northwest? They remain unknown. How could we sneak across this continent? The mountain is too high to hike across, and anywhere else there's too much land to cover. We'll be on the run for months. My love nodded. It leaves me ill at ease to remain here, simply waiting. Scalius stroked her scalp feathers and nodded. Me too, but for the good of our children, keeping a low profile is our best chance for survival. How can you be certain that the other tribes are being taken? My love asked. Some of the other villagers and I caught notice during our hunts. We witnessed with our own eyes the knights and paladins herding our kind. They had them shackled, bruised, and bleeding, like cattle. They were too far from our village to be our own. The humans had to have been raiding the other villages. Impossible. I thought the humans were past the use of slavery. They claim to be, since the end of the Drak Age. But who knows? Those dogmatists lack any sort of reasoning beyond saving their own skin. So what are they doing with their own people? I don't know. The two stood in silence, both staring at the ground. Krista swallowed heavily. It was a lot of information to take in. What does that mean for my family? My love spoke, breaking the silence. I need to check dinner. Of course, Scalius replied, before grabbing hold of her, embracing his wife with a kiss, tongues coiling for several moments before letting go. Uh-oh, Krista thought while my love marched towards the doorway. She scurried away from her hiding spot and rushed over to the stove. Quickly, she got up onto the footstool and placed the wooden spoon into the pot and began to stir again. Some of the lentils were now stuck to the bottom of the pot from the lack of motion. Oops, she thought. Thank you, my dear, my love said behind her. Her claws gently grabbed the spoon from Krista's hand and began to stir. Her mother's stirring stopped as she pressed the spoon against the bottom of the pot, pushing several times before stirring again. She knew the lentils were sticking. Krista stepped down and scratched her head. Normally, her mother would have commented about Krista's mistake. This was out of her character. Mom and Dad are both not normal right now. Kristalantis, can you please cut some of the potatoes? I washed them, but I haven't had the chance to get to them. My love pointed to the counter, dividing the kitchen from the entryway. Sure. Krista hadn't even noticed the potatoes from earlier. I probably didn't see them because I am too small. She walked over to the counter, dragging her footstool with her, placing it on the ground and stepping onto it. Moments later, she heard footsteps stomping behind her. Glancing over, she spotted her little brother dashing through the back entrance and around the kitchen, screaming in joy. She rushed past the counter and into the entryway, where he plopped himself onto a stool beside the dining table, resting his arms on the surface. He grabbed hold of a couple wooden blocks and began to fidget with them. Salanth, have you finished folding the laundry into the basket? My love asked. The little boy nodded and smiled at his mum. He didn't use words yet. He was much younger than Krista. His scalp feathers hadn't even grown in yet. Salanth was easily amused by stacking blocks and running around squealing. Give him a few decades and he will be fluent in speaking. Krista remembered some of her earlier childhood memories before Salanth was born. She'd never been hyperactive like he is. Boys. Screams erupted from outside the hut and brought everyone to a sudden halt. The sound of clanging metal and marching steel boots stomping on the gravel filled the air. Krista was midway through slicing a potato when she glanced over at her mother, whose eyes were wide open. "Krista, grab your brother." Before Malov could finish her sentence, 3 humans, dressed head to toe in silver armor, barged into the room from the front entrance. Their deep red capes swayed as they rushed into the small kitchen, the Knights' Union. Krista dropped her knife, watching as one of them swiftly grabbed her little brother by the head. He was small enough that the hand could easily grab his entire skull. "Humans!" Malov hissed. "Give back my son!" She snatched up a large butcher knife from the counter and began to dash towards her child's abductor. Before she could make it around the back entrance, "Mum!" Krista shouted. Everything was moving too fast for her to comprehend. Krista gasped as the man caught Malov's knife-wielding hand in midair. He yanked hard, turning her around. The human struck her in the muzzle with the blunt end of his broadsword, shattering her bone on impact. Malov dropped the knife and fell limply to the ground, knocked out cold as black blood began to seep from her face. Scalius burst into the room, pushing the red curtains from view. He quickly scanned the scenario. His son, held by humans, his wife on the ground bleeding, and his daughter, fear-struck. He let out a deep roar, neck vibrating at the sound as it burst from the depths of his throat. "You've made a grave mistake, you arrogant soft-skins." Scalius charged on all fours towards the 3 men who stood in the entry. He leaped into the air, front claws forward, snarling. Before the knights had a chance to react, he tackled one to the far right, his claws lunging into the steel plating of the man's helmet. Blood splattered from the open wound like juice, as if he were puncturing fruit. He pulled his claws from the corpse while lashing his tail at the other men. The sound made a crackling noise, prompting the men to step away. The knight who had entered from the back rushed over to aid his comrades, leaving Krista alone with her mother. She got off the stool and lay down beside her, pressing her forehead against hers. "Mum!" she cried, shaking her head with both hands. Malov did not respond. "Mum!" Krista repeated. At the cries of another man, Krista glanced up. Her father had sliced open another knight's throat, and red liquid sprayed wildly in all directions from the wound. He did a quick spin, avoiding the back entrance knight's sword thrust. Scalius finished his motion by slashing down with his claws onto the knight holding Salanth. The attack shredded the knight's armor from head to waist, ripping through his eyes, lips, and chest. The assault caused the man to drop, and Salanth and the little boy scurried away. All the ruckus caught the attention of more humans, who rushed into the hut. It was hard for Krista to count how many there were, but the new swarm of beings blocked her little brother from making a clean escape towards the kitchen. "I have to do something," she thought, still holding her mother while glancing around. What could she do? She got up and grabbed her footstool. There had to be a bigger knife somewhere. The potato peeling knife was too small and flimsy. There are only a few scenarios where you'll find yourself in need of killing. In self-defense, her father's words replayed in her mind. She slid the stool over to the stove, where they kept a drawer full of cooking tools and eating utensils. She knew her mother stored the knives in there. Her claws were nowhere near as sharp as her father's yet. She was far too young. Besides, her father said to only use them when ending one's suffering. The new attackers charged Scalius with their swords drawn. Krista's father lashed his tail at one of the men's ankles, coiling it around his leg. Scalius pulled on the man's limb, knocking him to the floor, causing a heavy thud. The other men were too close to avoid, and one knight thrust his blade, piercing into Scalius' stomach. The third man swung his sword at Scalius' neck, but the reptilian managed to grab the knight's arm in midair. The second knight pulled his blade from Scalius' gut and prepared to thrust again. Krista's father kicked the man in the chest, sending him tumbling backwards. The first knight got up off the ground and rushed at Scalius with his sword in the air, ready to strike. It hacked into his collarbone, and he yelped in pain, and the knight released his grasp. The 3 humans quickly overpowered Scalius with their swords, slicing into him from his neck down to the thighs, blood spraying from his body like a fountain. Krista saw the men move away from her father's bleeding form and back towards her mother, way too close to Krista. One of the humans stepped forward to grab Malov, still unconscious, by the scalp feathers, dragging her back to the dining table. Krista ducked to make herself as small as possible. She was high enough that she could still see the scene and scramble through the drawer. Fork? Butter knife? No! Lifting my love's head up, the knight raised his cold steel blade to her throat and carved into her scaled skin. The sound of flesh, then bone, and flesh again resounded in the kitchen with each slice he made into her neck. Krista's brother screamed and tried to run from the dining table, past the distracted men and towards Krista. A man cut the toddler's sprint short with a swift kick to the side of his head. Salanth was thrown into the air and collided with the base of a shelf. The impact of the human steel boot against the child's face left the man with a bloody footprint and the boy limp on the ground. This has to be a bad dream. She slipped off the stool and got onto the ground. The humans hadn't seen her yet, but she realized that she would be next. The men were now inspecting their dim comrades, and it would only be a matter of time before they noticed her. Just then, she heard a voice hiss out, "Over here!" Glancing towards the sound, Krista saw a boy, one of her own people, not much older than she, standing in the back doorway of the kitchen leading to the backyard. Quickly, before it's too late! She didn't know whether it was a blessing or dumb luck that this mysterious boy had found her, but it did not matter. Her survival instinct kicked in, and Krista ran outside to join him. Looking back, Krista could see the men still bent over their fallen allies and examining the room. The boy reached out for her hand, and Krista grabbed it. "They won't notice us. We are safe," he said. The two ran beyond the backyard. The Scalebane's family had a garden. It was small, but they always had enough to eat. Krista and the boy sprinted into the alley as fast as they could. The dirt track between rows of huts stretched on for blocks. The village was filled with the sound of screams, metal clanging, and splintering wood. Smoke rose from the flames that consumed some of the nearby huts. In that moment, Krista clued in. She had left her family to die. "My family, there," she wept. "I shouldn't have left them." "Mine is too," the boy replied. I live a couple huts down from your own. The humans came for us and I ran out as quickly as I could. I heard screams from your hut and saw that you were on the stool in the back entrance. I'm lucky I found you when I did." "Thank you," Krista whispered, the tears from her eyes as she studied him, noticing his long scalp feathers that went down past the base of his neck. He wore a simple gray tunic that draped over his shoulder, leaving the other bare. "What's your name?" She found it odd that he lived so close to her, yet they had never met before. Darkwing Lashback. "You?" "Krista Scalebane. Crystallantis. I wish we met under better circumstances." Darkwing stopped before he finished his sentence. As he stared into the distance, Krista followed his gaze. The alley's exit, only about 4 huts down, was blocked by 5 men in gold plating marching towards them, armed with maces and spears. "Paladins! Back this way!" Darkwing spun around, pulling her along. But the path behind them was now blocked by 2 knights, wielding blood-stained swords. The men from Krista's home had somehow followed them. Krista felt her heart sink. "What do we do?" she asked. Releasing her hand, Darkwing raised his arms in the air. "Put yours up too. Let them take us." "But we have to defend ourselves. That's the only time to fight," Krista said, thinking of her father's words. "Notice what happened to our families when they did?" Krista felt her stomach turn inside out. She knew her new friend wasn't wrong, but that didn't mean she didn't like the fact that she had to step down. Her father said killing was needed in self-defense. Darkwing is right, though. They're too strong, and there's too many of them. All right. Thank you. Chapter, actually, that was half of the chapter. It's a long one, the first one. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for coming in.